Good morning and welcome to the Guyanese Critical Live. I'm here this morning with Minister of Finance, Dr. Ashni Singh, and this morning's interview, exclusive interview as a matter of fact, on measures that only last night the President of the Republic of Guyana implemented, is to bring some clarity. There's been some bit of confusion, some bit, I must say, not much confusion. It might be more excitement as to what the President has offered, but there has been some bit of confusion, and I've asked the Minister of Finance for this interview to bring clarity to the Guyanese citizens so you could understand what is due to you, what the President meant about what he said yesterday, and who are the recipients of these measures that are being implemented by the government of Guyana. Dr. Ashni Singh, thank you for having me and bringing clarity and transparency to the Guyanese citizens. Just going right away into it, there has been some measures announced by the President, and I heard from media outlets $75,000, and then this morning listening to the President I heard 75 kilowatt hours. So there's been a bit of confusion here. Can you explain that?
Sure. So first of all, Kritik, let me say, as always, it's a great pleasure to be on your program. So thank you very much for inviting me again. Secondly, you're absolutely correct. President Ali announced a very important set of measures yesterday, and I will go through very quickly the three main elements of those measures and elaborate and explain them. Let me say, first of all, as an overall statement, that the three measures that he announced yesterday will see a total of $2.6 billion of additional income support being provided to the most vulnerable sections of our society. That translates into $2.6 billion of additional liquidity in households, in the hands of people, and ultimately in the shops, in the markets, and in the shops, and in the service providers throughout the length and breadth of our country. What are the three specific measures that he announced? The first is a special one-off grant to old age pensioners. So as you know, and as your viewers know, old age pensioners are people who are above 65 years of age. And we, in our previous time in government, removed the means test, meaning that every Guyanese person, every person living in Guyana, every Guyanese person, once you achieve the age of 65, you're entitled to an old age pension. So it was the previous PPP government that removed the means test and said that every single Guyanese person of age 65 will be eligible for the old age pension. It's also the PPP government, both during our previous time in office and more recently, that increased the old age pension significantly. So in our last budget, we increased the old age pension from $20,500 per month to $25,000 per month, meaning essentially that every single Guyanese person above 65 years of age gets a pension from the state of $25,000 a month. What this special measure does is that in addition to the monthly pension that old age pensioners will be receiving, the President has announced a special one-off grant of an additional $25,000. So anybody who is currently in receipt of old age pension will get an extra $25,000 as a one-off grant this year. What that translates to is you have probably about 65,000 old age pensioners, more or less. This additional $25,000 will translate to about an additional $1.6 billion in the hands of these people. So that's elderly people, they're all elderly people. You can imagine a home comprising a family of an elderly husband and wife. They will get between the two of them $25,000 each, which is an additional $50,000 will go to that household. So it's 65,000 pensioners receiving an additional one-off grant of $25,000, which translates to $1.6 billion being given to the elderly. That's the first element. The second element of the measures that the President announced goes to recipients of public assistance and disabled persons, persons living with disabilities. Here again, we have increased the public assistance payment significantly. Most recently, we increased it to $12,000 a month. This one-off grant will give to every single public assistance beneficiary, every person who receives public assistance from the state, and every other person who is disabled and is not currently a recipient of public assistance. All of that person, that whole set of persons, will receive also a one-off grant of $25,000. That we estimate is probably about 25,000 persons. This one-off grant of $25,000 to each of those 25,000 persons will amount to more than $600 million to that population. And then thirdly, targeting particularly vulnerable households. And this is households that we use as a proxy for identifying vulnerable households, the level of electricity consumption. And so targeting particularly vulnerable households, that is to say households that consume less than 75 kilowatt hours of electricity per month. So that's households that consume a relatively modest amount of electricity, basic household consuming a little bit of electricity. We will pay GPL on behalf of those households 1 month of electricity bill. So to those households, in total, that's going to translate to that's more than 40,000 households. That's how, like I said, households with modest incomes, with modest appliances, or modest electricity consumption, we're going to pay GPL 1 month of their electricity bills. That's going to be more than 40,000 households. That's going to put in their hands, free up in their income, because we're going to pay 1 month of their light bill. That's going to free up in their hands. In total, for those 40,000 households, that approximately 40,000 households, that's going to free up about $200 million for them. So in total, the one-off grant to old age pensioners, the one-off grant to public assistance beneficiaries, the 3 months of electricity that we will pay, in total, those three measures will see an injection of $2.6 billion to these vulnerable sections of society. I might add, and I'm happy to elaborate, if you want me to go back to any one of these aspects, I would be happy to elaborate. But I might add that bear in mind that these three measures that the President announced last night come on top of a number of other very significant interventions that the government has announced recently, or that the government is in the course of implementation. Specifically, I want to mention, as you know, the President also recently announced a number of flood relief interventions for those who were most severely affected by the floods of May, June, July 2021. That set of measures targeted in particular households that were affected by the floods and farmers who have lost their productive capacity. So as you know, many of your viewers either saw or experienced water in people's homes, water in people's farmlands, loss of crops, loss of livestock, etc. We lost a lot of acreage on the cash crops, on the rice cultivation, on the sugar cultivation. People lost cattle, they lost sheep, goats, poultry. Quite a lot of livestock and crops were lost. And so the measures that the President announced for the flood relief interventions, that is injecting an additional, many of measures came up to about $7.8 billion, but the actual cash, the direct cash transfers to the households and the farmers will amount to about $7.3 billion. Then on top of that, as you know, we're currently rolling out, I should mention that the flood relief interventions we will start paying by the end of this week, during the course of this week. Then we have on top of that, the Because We Care cash grant that we're currently implementing, which is delivering direct cash support to parents of children who are of school age. That is currently being paid, and lots of parents have already received those cash grants. I had the privilege of participating in this cash grant initiative at a number of schools. Most recently, I was at Queen's College, I think just about a week ago. That Because We Care cash grant initiative will see about $3.3 billion being delivered to parents of school-age children. So if you take all of these groups, if you take parents of school-age children, children who are preparing to return to school, they have to buy school supplies, etc. They are getting $3.3 billion, the parents of the school-age children, preparing them to return to school very shortly. The households and farmers who were affected by the floods, they're getting about $7.3 billion. The vulnerable sections of society, the elderly, public assistance beneficiaries and disabled persons, vulnerable households, low-income households, as reflected by their electricity consumption. That population group, or most groups of the population, they are getting about $2.6 billion. If you take those three measures alone, across those three measures, you have about $30 billion worth of direct cash transfers to vulnerable sections of society or to targeted groups of society, like I said, the children and flood-affected populations. And that, of course, is on top of the several other measures that we've taken as a government in Budget 2020 and in Budget 2021, initiatives to remove or to reverse the hardship that was caused by the AP and UAFC's punitive tax policies, things like removing the VAT on electricity, VAT on water, VAT on basic household and basic food supplies, basic household necessities, VAT on data for household use, VAT on cell phones, VAT on construction materials, VAT on heavy equipment from the standpoint of creating jobs for people, reducing the cost of doing business, etc. Initiatives to improve the affordability of housing. So there's a wide range of measures that we've been implementing since we came into office. In Budget 2020, Budget 2020, Budget 2021, and in these most recent initiatives that the President is doing. So there's a very comprehensive range of policy interventions that are being implemented to ensure that relief is delivered to those who need it most in our society.
Dr. Singh, all that being said, I think your government should be dubbed the free up government. The only worry from me, and I'm glad from your perspective to explain, how does the government sustain this? The rate this government is going at, this administration has given more to the people in a year than the last administration gave, trickle down to the regular man, the man on the street. This administration has given more in 1 year than the previous administration has given in 5 years. Is this sustainable? And if you could capture quickly how?
Sure. Well, you raise a very important point. I mean, you're absolutely correct that we have delivered in 1 year far more than they delivered in 5 years. You're absolutely correct on that. And I mean, consider that what we've done is, one, reduce taxes on the things that matter most to people, and two, deliver support to people at a level that, like you said, cumulatively over the 5-year period of the AP and UAFC, they did not deliver that kind of support. But let me tell you why and how it is sustainable. Interventions such as this might look like an immediate cost to the Treasury. They might look, and of course they are an immediate cost to the Treasury. But what do they stimulate in terms of economic activity? When you reduce taxes and you reduce the cost of doing business, or when you deliver support to households, that money doesn't vanish into thin air. It stimulates economic activity. So by reducing the cost of home construction, you stimulate home construction activity. By putting money in by reducing the cost of, let us say, the cost of mining activities, or the cost of agriculture, by removing taxes on heavy equipment, you stimulate economic activity. So the potential for economic activity, while there might be an immediate or short-term fiscal cost, the real impact is in the stimulation of economic activity that then generates jobs, generates incomes, and pays taxes too. Similarly, when we provide direct cash transfers to these various groups, let's say the parents of the school-age children, all of the other groups like the pensioners or the public assistance beneficiaries. That money doesn't only go to these people and vanish into thin air. They then use that cash transfer that's provided to them, that support that is provided to them. They then take it, you know what they do? I mean, you know this pretty better than most people. They then take it immediately, they go to the market. They buy some goods with it, some basic necessities with it. They go to the shops, they buy some basic necessities with it. They go to the service providers, they buy some basic necessities with it. And it then multiplies itself over the economy. The person in the market gets more sales, they then, with their additional sales, go to the wholesaler, they buy more. The wholesaler then goes to the manufacturer, and he or she buys more. And more economic activity is stimulated, and it multiplies itself over and over in the economy, generating economic activity, generating revenue for the government, generating jobs for people, generating incomes for people. So these are not interventions that just constitute a cost of the treasury or a transfer of cash to people. They are interventions that represent an important injection of liquidity into the economy, and they stimulate activity, they create jobs, they generate incomes, both for households and individuals, additional incomes for households and individuals, and also, of course, they generate revenue for government because they generate more economic activity.
Dr. Singh, that explanation has just opened up one more question for me. Do you think the inability of the past administration to implement such a formula is their lack of empathy or their inability to understand a simple ABC formula? You explain it to me, made me aware that, well, any accountant you ask will be able to tell you, this is how it works. You put in, and then you will get out. It will be stimulated, and it comes out. What do you think would have been the cause for the last minister that sat in this office would not have tried to see stimulants in the economy that will, grow the economy?
Well, let me say this. If you look at the last government as a whole, what you saw was a government that had absolutely no vision whatsoever regarding where they would take the country. So there's no vision. You heard nothing about their long-term economic strategy whatsoever. In fact, most people will say to you that it appeared that their sole economic strategy was simply to wait and buy. Most people will say that. You heard nothing about what they were going to do to stimulate agriculture. You heard nothing about what they were going to do to stimulate manufacturing. You heard nothing about what they were going to do to stimulate services. You heard nothing about what they were going to do to diversify the economy. You heard very little or nothing about you heard nothing about what they were going to do to stimulate tourism. Absolutely nothing, or very little. And so, first of all, I think the evidence clearly points to a complete lack of vision as it relates to where they wanted to take the country. Contrast that, for example, with the current administration, and in particular the leadership of the current administration. If you listen to President Irfaan Ali, he has a very, very clear vision of where he wants to take Ghana. And it's a very ambitious vision. And his instructions to his cabinet are very clear that vision has to be realized by aggressive implementation. Which brings me to the second point. A second major distinction between the previous government, the AP and UPFC government, and this government, is that we are actually a working government. We are busy from the first day that we came into office. We engaged stakeholders in society. The president met with the private sector immediately. That was one of the first meetings that we did. Inquiring from them what was the state of the economy, what needed to do to stimulate economic activity. If you go back, you'll see that was a meeting that he did on the first day that he assumed office. He met with the private sector to say, what's the state of the economy? What do we need to do to stimulate economic activity? We hit the ground running, and we're a working government. In contrast, the AP and UAFC was a very ceremonial government, more concerned about frivolous and superficial things. I mean, they came into government and they were more concerned about painting buildings green. That was their priority. Repainting everything, changing the color of the country to green. That was, it might sound frivolous, but it's not something that I'm making up. I mean, every single Guyanese person saw.
It's a matter of fact.
It's a matter of fact. Their priority was not to outline an economic vision that would benefit all of the Guyanese people. Their priority was to paint buildings green and to change everything green. That was their priority. Frivolous and superficial things. I don't know whether that was a problem, whether that was a problem of competence. I don't know whether it was a problem of a wrong emphasis or whatever. Thirdly, we have looked very carefully at the composition of the budget, and there was truth. I mean, if you look at how we have reoriented the composition of the budget, we have reoriented the composition of the budget towards the things that really matter to realize the vision that the president has outlined to the country. And there's a very clear distinction between the budgets that we have presented and will be presenting from the budgets of the people of the BFC. They spent a lot of money on wasteful and inefficient expenditure. So, many others have spoken about this before, including, of course, Vice President Jack Dale, President Ali, and others. A lot of their expenditure, they had raised taxes and they were collecting a lot of additional revenue to fund inefficient, wasteful, and inconsequential expenditures. Things like refreshments and meals have gone up dramatically, while at the same time they were cutting back investment in the critical sectors that are matter for laying the foundation for long-term growth. We have done exactly the opposite. We are trying to rein in, contain the less efficient or less productive areas of expenditure, and to reorient the budget towards investing in the things that matter most. So, for example, you'll see we have an aggressive infrastructure program. Why is that important? That's important because infrastructure will lay the foundation for long-term growth. When we invest in transport infrastructure, things like roads, that's opening up tens of thousands of new acres of land to be brought into productive activity or to be put to important social uses like housing. So, for example, we are already rolling out a housing program that will see, as you know, we promised in our manifesto 10,000 house lots per year. We're already well on our way to doing that. We've already opened up significant new lands on the East Coast, on the East Bank, in West Demerara. We're rolling out, building up the infrastructure. We've ramped up our program for allocation and distribution of house lots in a very aggressive way. Now, think about this. This is not just a housing program that ends there. When you build out infrastructure, so we're building out the infrastructure to open up lands for housing. Let me just give one example. We built out infrastructure to open up land for housing. We remove taxes on construction materials. And we raise the ceiling on low-income mortgages so that it's more affordable. And we double the ceiling on mortgages eligible for mortgage interest relief. Basically measures intended to make it more affordable to private citizens to get a mortgage to build their house. When you put those measures together, you're going to have more people getting allocated a plot of land, going to the bank or the building society, getting a loan, starting to build your home. Now think about it. Every single home that is under construction, think about how many jobs it creates. The construction of a home requires transportation of materials. It requires construction workers. At a minimum, you're talking about 5 to 10 jobs. In a very conservative way, you're talking about 5 to 10 jobs just to construct one house. Consider that we are rolling out about 10,000 houses every year, 10,000 house lots, which will translate into more work for construction workers, more business for transportation operators, whether it's the horse-cart operators, the truck drivers, people going up to the sand pit, people bringing the wood, people bringing the cement, more work for the carpenters, the masons, the plumbers, the electricians, more business for the hardware stores, more business for, literally every sector that is more business for the furniture stores, because when people buy a house, they will try to put in some furniture. They may start modestly, but then acquire some more furniture. So think about, so that, and just to give you one example, that housing program alone will stimulate vast volumes of economic activity in multiple sectors of the country. Every additional house is going to get an electricity connection, they're going to get a telephone connection, they're going to want a television connection. So they're going to consume internet. And so they comprise a new electricity subscriber, a new telephone subscriber, a new internet subscriber, more business for the businesses that are operating in Ireland. And so we're building out, we're investing far more heavily in infrastructure, which lays the foundation for not only economic growth, but well-being for people. And you know what it means for someone to be able to own their own home. You know what it means for someone to be able to get a job. And those are the things that really matter.
These are the foundations of human development itself.
Absolutely. Those are the things that really matter. And so we have very consciously reoriented the budget to the things that really matter and away from the wasteful spending that we have seen to have a very strong proclivity.
Dr. Singh, recently the president also announced, I don't know if it could be considered to be a stimulus, but there's a bit of a reduction in how freight is looked at, the taxation and that. Can you explain that and how that trickles down to the ordinary man?
Oh, absolutely. I'm glad that you asked that. So that's another measure that the president announced within the last week or 10 days or so. And that measure will inject free up an additional $4.8 billion for businesses and consumers in Ghana. So how does that work? When goods are imported into Ghana or indeed any other country, they are imported typically at what's described as CIF, cost, insurance, and freight. So there's the cost of the goods. The goods then come on a ship, or most typically a ship, in a container, or otherwise packaged in a ship. The shipper has to incur the cost of insurance and the freight. That's the cost of bringing the goods together. So that's the CIF. When your viewers hear about CIF, cost, insurance, and freight. So the freight is a component of the cost of landing goods in Ghana. Now, what has happened globally as a result of COVID-19 is a number of things. One, the reality is that because of COVID-19, there's been reduced production in a number of sectors because of social distancing. The factories are not operating the way they used to operate, etc. So there is an issue on the supply side because factories are not operating in the way they used to in the pre-COVID world. So there's a problem with supply for a lot of commodities. That has impacted on prices. But in addition to that, largely also as a result of the issues related to COVID, issues related to changing trade patterns, etc. Freight costs have gone up dramatically. And this is a globally documented phenomenon. Any one of your viewers can just Google global freight costs, and they will see there's stories written all over the world. Freight costs have gone up. So whereas pre-COVID it might have cost you maybe $3,000 to bring a container to Ghana, now it costs more than $15,000, almost $20,000 to bring a container to Ghana. In fact, somebody said to me it's now costing even more than $20,000, almost $23,000 for a 44 container to bring to Ghana. So freight costs, the cost of shipping has gone up. Now, what that means is that the cost of landing the goods in Ghana has gone up, because remember the CIF cost that I referred to. Freight is a part of the cost of bringing the goods to Ghana. The way our tax system works and the way tax systems around the world works is that import taxes, things like duty or VAT on imports, Those taxes are applied on the CIF value. So they're applied on the cost of landing the goods in the cost at source, plus the insurance, plus the freight is the cost of landing the goods in there. So if freight costs go up, the value of the goods on which the taxes are applied goes up, which means the taxes will go up. The president announced a very important initiative. What he said was that he recognized that importers are bearing the cost of higher costs of production and higher costs of sourcing goods in the international market. On the question of the freight, what he said was that we will introduce a cap on the freight. So instead of applying the taxes on the freight component of the cost of the goods, instead of applying the import taxes, the duty and VAT on the freight, the escalated freight cost, the $15,000 or $20,000 per container, we will put a cap on it on pre-COVID levels. So we go back to the pre-COVID levels. So what we'll do is there will be an adjustment on the CIF value of the goods that are coming in to take out the escalation, the COVID-related escalation in freight costs, and return the freight cost to pre-COVID levels. That will then result in a lower CIF value for goods that are landed, which will result in lower taxes, which will result in lower costs to businesses, and then ultimately, which we are hoping will result in lower costs to consumers. And we estimate that in total, that will pass on about $4.8 billion into the taxes that will have accumulated on the freight company.
Let me see if I understand this in layman terms, Dr. Singh. The government, as a result of understanding the effects of freight costs, have decided to forego some of the taxes. So nobody has gone into the consolidated fund to introduce any money.
No.
So they've decided we're going to be taking taxes like we used to take in the past, because we've realized prices have gone up for shipping and insurance and everything else, and they've foregone a certain amount of taxes. And that is expected to translate to what the citizen pay for goods in the supermarkets, what they pay for hardware and everything else. My question is, what methods will be put in place to ensure that that trickle-down effect occurs?
Well, first of all, you're absolutely correct in your explanation. Thanks a lot. You said it in a much more elegant way than I said it. So you really did it. You're absolutely correct in your description. This is government foregoing taxes. We're saying we're not going to collect these taxes. So that's $4.8 billion worth of taxes we're not going to collect. Which brings us to the question that you asked, the trickle down. Because we want this to get to the final consumers. We have said that we're going to be working very closely with the private sector and indeed monitoring what happens on the private sector side to ensure that it is passed on. So the GRA is doing this monitoring, and in addition to that, the Consumer Affairs Division in the Ministry of Tourism is also keeping a very close eye on how it is passed on. But let me say that very importantly, the private sector also recognizes how important it is to pass this benefit on. You might have seen a statement made by, I think it was the Chamber of Commerce, who said very clearly, we, in their statement, this is the private sector speaking, and emphasized how important it would be to ensure that this is passed on to consumers. Because, the reality is that, more competitive prices to consumers results in larger volumes. And so I think, and I'm hoping too, that the business community recognizes that passing on this benefit and putting this liquidity in the hands of people will in turn result in more volumes of business being done. And so we're certainly going to monitor it very closely on the government side. We're going to continue to work very closely with business support organizations, the Private Sector Commission, the Chambers of Commerce, etc., for them and through them to ensure that their membership understands how important it is to pass on this benefit. Because passing on this benefit will put liquidity in the hands of people who will end up buying and consuming more, which will ultimately be down to the benefit of not only the households that will be buying and consuming more, but the business community who will be selling them the goods and services that they are buying and consuming. So we're going to work very closely with the private. We will will be monitoring it. We will work very closely with the private sector. And I'm hopeful that good sense and good business both prevail. And it is good sense and it is good business to ensure that consumers benefit so that they have additional liquidity which they can in turn spend. Businesses can do more value.
Well, in addition to that, Dr. Singh, it is very, it would be wise of this administration to stick to what they placed in their manifesto, because I'm telling you, 2025 people will be looking at that. Dr. Singh, I know, you're busy and you dispensing these billions of dollars take a lot of time. So don't let me hold you back. I just wanna go over quickly what the president said last night. So there is a one-off 1 month for 75 kilowatt hour households. The government paying the light bill for one light bill. And we got breaking down the people understand we're not getting misinformation out there.
Correct.
Is there an average what 75 kilowatt hours equate to in dollars? Do you have an idea?
I don't have that number with me right now, but you are correct in your description. We are going to be paying for people who consume 75 kilowatt hours or less. We will pay 190.
Roger. 75 kilowatts. So I'm going to try to have people transfer the story into kilowatt hours, because I think for business I pay about $60 per kilowatt hour. I'm sure, but I want to make sure of that and get clarity for the people, because when you say 40,000 households are going to be receiving this, if clarity is not brought to what amount of money that is, those 40,000 households don't know who they are,
Sure.
right? So these people need to know things like that. Secondly, granny, grandfather, anybody over 65 getting $25,000.
Correct. As long as they are an old age pensioner, right?
Right, old age pensions.
Old age pensioners.
When?
Well, we're going to be rolling this out immediately as soon as possible. I would say that in a matter of weeks we expect this to be.
Is it going to be across country, or they're just like We Care program is going across the country, different places? Is there a specific formula? Because normally the old age pensioners got a card, is get and go get. Is it going to come in that form? How are they to expect it?
So it's going to come. You are correct that the old age pensioners come to get a pension book and they can cash that pension book. So it's going to work in exactly the same way.
The same way. And they could use the same means that they normally do to encash that.
Absolutely.
Okay. There were three.
And then the public assistance and disabled persons.
Okay.
Third one.
Somewhere around 25,000 people we're suggesting. How does that roll out?
So that also works in a very similar way. Right now, public assistance beneficiaries also get a book. And it's going to be implemented in exactly the same way. So just like how the old age pensioners get their pension book and they can cash it, they can go to the post office and they cash it, and this $25,000 will be paid through that same mechanism. Similarly, public assistance beneficiaries also get a pension book, not a pension book, a public assistance book, and that same mechanism will be used to. They will also go to the same place that they always encash for public assistance voucher. They can go to that same place and collect this additional.
And can we see that rolling out in the earliest months, or it is still a work in progress?
No. We're going to be doing it. I mean, we have issued instructions that this must be done immediately. So it's not going to be done. This is not something that we're going to be waiting until the year end to do. This is something that we're going to be rolling out within a matter of weeks.
Does your ministry have the required mechanisms? Because, Minister, you're in this position just under a year now. There was an administration for 5 years before that gave nothing, was accountable for nothing. How does your ministry cope with the president coming up with ideas? We're going to be giving this, we're going to be doing that. How does your ministry cope with transparency and accountability under these circumstances?
Well, I'll tell you what. I mean, first of all, these are the things that really matter. Delivering the support to people are the things that really. This is what really matters to people. So what we have to do, and what we have always done, is we put in place a mechanism that is robust, that can withstand scrutiny, that is auditable, that is scrutinized by the auditors, and we've done this with multiple initiatives. So if you go back a little, we did this with the COVID-19 cash grant. Don't forget that we introduced the COVID-19 cash grant as soon as we came into government. We rolled this out nationwide throughout all of the regions. It was done in a very open and transparent way. It was observed by the auditors, and it is fully audited. We are doing it right now with the Because We Care cash grant. So right now there are teams that are distributing these Because We Care cash grants. It's done through a very clear and transparent mechanism. The criteria are very clear. There are multiple layers that are involved, multiple checks, multiple levels of scrutiny to make sure that the intended beneficiaries get what they have to receive. I mean, in many cases, there are established registers of these people. So, like with the school children, there are established registers of school children that we're using. With old age pensioners, there's an established database of old age pensioners. With public assistance beneficiaries, there's an established database of beneficiaries. So we, as we have always done, we ensure that we put in place a mechanism that delivers the support in the most timely possible manner to beneficiaries, but that maintains the necessary safeguards to ensure the integrity of the program, because we do have to ensure that the program reaches, the intervention reaches the intended beneficiary, and does not go to persons who are not the intended beneficiary. And so designing the administrative mechanism for rolling it out is something that my staff and staff of the other ministries that are involved. In the case of the Because We Care initiative, this is being led by the Ministry of Education. In the case of the flood relief interventions, this is being led by the Ministry of Agriculture. In collaboration with those ministries, we ensure a robust mechanism for ensuring both timely delivery, because we want the support to get to people in a timely manner, timely delivery without compromising the controls and scrutiny that are necessary to ensure accountability and transparency, and to maintain auditability so that anybody can come and scrutinize, verify, and audit what they implement.
Dr. Singh, on that note, I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be open and transparent to the Guyanese citizens, and I hope we could do this more often and to bring in clarity to the citizens. Once again, thank you very much for this interview.
Thank you very much, Pratik. It's always a great pleasure, and I'd be happy to come back anytime you wish.